believe that it is 2022. I'm also very impressed by what we've managed to do virtually. I know that it was no small feat for anybody, and that I don't know that any of us would have signed up to do everything virtual that we have, but I think we've really done a great job pulling it off. So happy 2022.
To meet our demands by 2050 using the renewable scenario.
Let's just go ahead and make sure we're all muted if possible. Thank you. Sorry. Comes right after how impressed I am with everything we did virtually, right? Okay, so thanks for joining. We have a pretty standard agenda for everybody here today. We're going to go ahead and do attendance, adopt minutes, adopt our agenda, and then we're going to dig into the draft of the My Healthy Climate Plan. So glad you're all here. So let's go ahead and start with attendance. We're going to go in alphabetical order. So I'm warning the top of the alphabet that we're going to start there. Which brings us right at the beginning to Director Paul Adjuba from MDOT, or Niles from MDOT. Are either of you with us, gentlemen? All right. Frank Beaver, I saw Frank on my screen. Hi, Frank.
Good afternoon. Hello.
Director Susan Corbin or Judd Herzer from Leo.
I'm here, Director Clark.
Great. Thanks, Judd. Mary Draves on my screen. Nice to see you, Mary.
Good to see you too.
Carrie Dugan. I think Carrie's here, but yep, there's Carrie. Here, but off camera.
Thank you, guys. Liam gives his regards, but he's got COVID, so I'm going to keep him off camera today.
All right. Well, good luck with that. I know it's not easy these days. Director Eichinger.
Here. Happy New Year.
Always representing with a very beautiful Michigan background. Thank you. Rachel Eubanks from Treasury.
Hey, present.
Great. Hey. Jim Harrison.
I am here. Good afternoon, everybody.
Hey, Jim. Director Hertel or Megan Groen from DHHS.
Megan's here. Thanks, Director.
Thanks, Megan. Brandon Hoffmeister from Consumers.
I'm here.
Yeah, Brandon at the bottom of my screen. Awesome. Marnice Jackson. I think I had Marnice, but she's gone now. Marnice, are you with us? Oh, there she is. Yep. Hi, I see you.
Oh, I'm present. Hi,
Great.
everyone.
Thank you, ma'am. Gary McDowell. I think I see Joseph Rivet from MDARD, who might be sporting the same background as Director Eichinger. It's hard to say.
No, these are the Holy Waters, just outside of Grayling, so they're better. No offense, Director.
Got it. Good to know. But we're not competitive. Phyllis Meadows. Phyllis, are you with us today? Okay, we'll loop back. MEDC, either Quentin Messer or Steve Bacall.
Steve here, Director.
Oh, hey, Steve. Great,
Hello.
Thanks. Jonathan Overpeck. Dean Peck, are you with us? All right, I'm sure he'll be joining. Attendant Pozlowski, middle of my screen, sporting a beautiful snowflake sweater.
'Tis the season. Here, hi, everybody.
Sweater and snowflakes. Okay. Cynthia Render Williams. I think I had Cynthia. Oh, yeah, there's
I'm
Cynthia.
here. Happy New Year.
Great. Happy New Year. Phil Roos.
I'm here. Hi, everybody.
Great. Hey, Phil. Chair Scripps is not with us. He is off in the UP up in Ironwood doing a session on the UMERC IRP. But I think he was going to send somebody from MPSC. Is there anyone representing the MPSC on? Nope. Okay. I know Sarah's out with a new baby. She often joins us, but I'm sure we'll get somebody at some point. Jarrell Slaughter. Jarrell, are you with us? Oh, I don't see Jarrell. Okay, Sam Stolper. I had Sam on the screen. There he is.
Here. Hi, Director Clark. Hi, everybody.
Great. Hey, Sam. And then finally, Ron Vogelweed. You with us, Ron? Okay, we're missing a few. Anybody join us after I did a roll call that wants to chime in if I might have missed you?
Hi, my name is Zina Buzova. I'm representing GM. I'm here in replacement of Michael Mayton.
Alrighty. Anybody on the council would like to chime in?
Oh, my apologies.
No worries. Great. Okay, so we're going to go up to the top. And first, we're going to put the agenda in front of us for today. So if I could have a motion in a second for today's agenda, and then we can have some discussion.
I'll move. Director Clark, Mary
Thanks,
Graves.
Mary.
Support.
Support.
Great. So today's agenda is, frankly, the plan. So you got a version of it last night of the draft plan, and the schedule is to submit a draft plan to the governor on Friday. So we wanted to have that discussion here today, and then know that there's also ability for council members to give input between here and Friday too. So talking plan all day today. All right, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposition, same sign? All right, thanks everybody. We're gonna go ahead and adopt our meeting minutes from the December 14th meeting. Let's go ahead. If I could have a motion in a second on the December 14th minutes, please.
So moved.
I'll second.
Great, thank you. So if anyone's got any improvements for the December 14th minutes, anything we might have missed or characterized incorrectly, somebody wants to fix? Okay, before we adopt, I just am gonna take a break again, chair's prerogative, and say what a huge debt of gratitude I owe to my colleagues in state government. We certainly did not allocate enough time because there was so much work to articulate. So really grateful to all the departments for the time that they took describing their climate work, knowing that we had 4 departments who didn't even speak, who have another chunk of work to be represented there. So anyway, just feel like I had to say it. All in favor of the minutes from the 14th, please say aye.
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 Any opposition? All right, thanks everybody. So as I mentioned earlier, you council members received a draft that is for council members only. So we ask that you please use that for your use to give us input and for the conversation here today. There will be a draft of the My Healthy Climate Plan made public on Friday, and that will take us into the official public comment phase. We're expecting lots of opportunity for discussion about what's in there. So we wanted council members to have a first bite at the discussion. And so I think what you probably saw is that the effort, of course, is iterative too. So we wanted to make sure that you had a chance as council members to see kind of what was behind the curtain in terms of the work that we're doing. So that's what we wanted to discuss here today. If you don't mind, Kimber, pulling up the slides, what I'm going to do is just set the table a little bit for those who may not have had time to go through the plan with any level of depth, just because it was late yesterday that you received it, and so I understand you're busy folks. So what I wanted to do is just set the table with what we see as the big ticket discussion items in the plan itself. So again, just to ground us in the work that is in front of us, the governor set a carbon neutrality goal for economy-wide no later than 2050, and directed EGLE to draft the My Healthy Climate Plan, which is our action plan, and then also directed EGLE to create the Council on Climate Solutions to advise the department in formulating and then overseeing implementation of the plan. So as we're talking through the plan, and as I think you heard from us in November and December, a lot of discussion about moving towards implementation, knowing that plans are just the foundation for what's going forward. What really matters is the action that we all take together. So we'll be talking a bit about the implementation steps. Excuse me. And again, the council acts in advisory capacity to the governor, to the department. I know we've looked at this a couple of times, but I just like to go back to the basics to make us grounded and confident in what we're talking about here together today. I don't know that I need to re-articulate this for all of you, but of course, 14 meetings last year, the 5 work groups met with hundreds of participants and hundreds of recommendations. We've already had 4 listening sessions and are really looking forward to additional listening sessions once we get the draft out there. And then we continue to receive regular public comment, which is really helpful in crafting where we're at so far. So as I mentioned earlier, today is our opportunity to discuss the draft together in the council structure. Let me say too, as a sidebar, as we mentioned in December and I think in November as well, anytime anybody wants to have, one-on-one conversations too, please feel free to reach out. I know that many of those happened in the intermediate. We're always happy to have additional discussions if folks want to talk that through. So today's the 11th. Based on the executive directive, we are required to send to the governor a draft plan by Friday. So you have an early version from yesterday, and as you will see when you look at it, if you haven't already, it's a draft. We're working through a draft. It's an opportunity to work together as to what ends up becoming part of that document that then goes to the governor. The version that goes on Friday technically is still a draft 2, so that we can receive public comment. So that's what happens after the version goes to the governor's 30 days of public comment. On February 22nd, we have a meeting scheduled to bring us back together and discuss the public comment that was received and to contemplate how that fits into feedback from council members to pull it all together. And then the final plan goes to the governor March 14th. So this is the outline that's in front of us in terms of what it is that we're working towards. So I've got this slide in here later too. Just wanted to make sure that I help people kind of remember like the grounding and then where the opportunities are for the conversation going forward. So what's in the plan? So what's in the plan? Focus on competitiveness, focus on opportunity and how communities and workers will have opportunities as we're transitioning, focus on impacts and the impacts on Michiganders of our changing climate, and then how people's pocketbooks will be affected by the work going forward. As I like to say, what we've tried to pull out, first off, we've tried to raise up the recommendations that have come out of the work groups. So there's hundreds of recommendations, hundreds of people that were part of that, and frankly, a lot of time and energy that's really important that went into the work of the work groups. Now, that's not to say that you can do everything and do all things. And so the way that I like to think about it is to steal that phrase from Franklin Covey. It's schedule your big rocks first. So what are the big pieces that are necessary in order to move us forward? I also think about it in terms of an iterative plan. So we're, having this conversation about a draft. There's a draft that goes to the governor, input that's necessary from kind of a wider audience. And then, frankly, once it even goes to the governor, at that point, it's not really, in my mind, it's not really done because then, more work continues, right? It continues the work together that's necessary to implement the things that we call out as necessary recommendations. So when we look at the key focus areas, I think it's important to talk about the overarching goals and really what's driving what's driving the key recommendations. And so, of course, that reduction in greenhouse gas emissions and the need to achieve carbon neutrality. I think that, as we think through our goal timeline, we've had a lot of discussions from an Eagle perspective as well as in these council meetings about, what is our 10-year goal? What is our 2030 goal? What's our 2050 goal? As we think about the 25 to 2030, so the next 5-year goal, there's a lot that you'll see in this plan and that we'll talk about around a wholesale transition to 100% carbon-free energy by 2050. We just think that that's something that came up all over and over in the course of the work group discussion. And I think you'll see real regularly in the document that's in front of you. So, it's carbon-free energy for that 2050 goal. It's carbon-free transportation for that 2050 goal, and carbon-free for buildings by that 2050 goal. So I think it's really important that we have kind of that high level discussion or umbrella as we're thinking it through. So when we think about the focus areas, we've broken them out into a few categories. So the first being energy production. So again, lifting up key rocks or key recommendations from the work group presentations that you all listened to. So we think it's a holistic statewide energy planning. It's renewable energy in an RPS or an RES 50% by 2030, and a phase out on the use of coal by 2035. From a state of Michigan perspective, from the government, powering state facilities with 100% renewables, siting solar on state-owned land and facilities, and assisting communities with best practices, which is something that Eagle's been working on with other partner agencies. And then tripling our recycling rate to 45% and promoting procurement of low carbon and circular economy products in the energy production space. Let me say, I should have said at the outset, I'd just like to run through what we think are the big rocks to get us into that kind of next step of discussion phase. But I think it's helpful to wrap your head around all the rocks. I don't know. I might be mixing too many metaphors at this point. So I'd like to just lay out the full table for discussion. On the transportation and mobility side, you heard from Council on Future Mobility and Electrification this target of charging infrastructure to support 2 million EVs on the roads by 2030. So we, raise up that from the work group. Also, establishing a state EV purchase incentive. Of course, I should mention too that, and it's perhaps going through your mind that some of these are things that are goals for the administration. Some of these are things that require partnership with the legislature, and many of these things are things that require partnership with many stakeholders outside of state government, NGOs, private sector, et cetera, in order to make them happen. Like an EV purchase incentive, which would require work with the legislature. Transitioning the state's fleet to cleaner fuels and EVs, and creating programs for local governments, small businesses, and schools in order to do the same. Expanding access to efficient public transit and targeted mobility options, broadening transportation and planning to consider climate change, and then considering a low carbon fuel standard. So again, things that came out of the work group discussion that we think crystallize as the bigger pieces to be considered. On the building and home side, a 2% energy waste reduction target for electricity and a 1% for natural gas. Encouraging research and the development of industrial hubs and research development focused on reducing greenhouse gas emissions. We heard a lot about that innovation component that's really critical. We talked a lot about we have tools to get us to 80% or 90% along this path. We need innovation for the last chunk of work, and we think that that innovation must be informed by a Michigan-specific framework. Discussing financing options or investing in Michigan Saves Green Bank to help families and small businesses invest in cleaner energy, and then adopting the 2021 model building codes. So some important components for homes and buildings to take us forward. Environmental justice, specifically that application of Justice 40. We're continuing from an Eagle perspective to work with our partners at the federal level to understand Justice 40 and that provisioning, but that core concept I think is one that's necessary throughout all of our budget work going forward. We heard through all the work groups about supporting communities and workers so that we're ensuring a just transition for job planning and long-term economic opportunity planning. We heard a lot about work ongoing at LEO around existing job training and apprentices programs, but also wanted to raise that up as a critical component so that we're supporting workforce and workers as we move forward on this pathway. And then allocating funding to help homes that are ineligible for the weatherization assistance and helping families that have been struggling with the impacts from climate change related storm events. Some real specific areas, for example, in the Southeast Michigan, geography, because of the challenges that we saw with flooding over the summer, are things like backup preventers and things that will really make a difference tangibly very quickly for Michigan citizens dealing with climate change. Whew! Oh, that was my last one. Okay. That makes sense. So just wanted to frame for all of you what we took away as the big pieces for recommendations. And at this point, so we want to have a discussion here today and have a chance to, as council members, talk together about the recommendations and about the prioritization. And then we're hoping that we can receive feedback from council members over the next couple of days to incorporate into the draft plan that then gets delivered to the governor on Friday. At that point, we'll also post it and start into the public engagement phase. And so there'll be opportunities for, we're going to set up some listening sessions specifically by the state of Michigan, and then are also interested in partnering, frankly, with all of you and with other stakeholders who are interested in having discussions around the My Healthy Climate Plan and what things people hope to see in it or hope to strengthen. So with that, I am going to hand it off to our favorite Doug Scott from GPI to lead us through a discussion of these recommendations.
Thanks, Director. And just want to say really appreciate the opportunity to work with you and the Eagle staff, but also with the council and all of the work groups that we had an opportunity to work with. We've done work like this, and we're doing work like this in a number of states, and really appreciate all of the efforts from the council members, as well as all of the hundreds of people who took part in this. Every state does it a little different, but we can honestly say that the number of meetings that you've had here from the council and the number of work groups, and in one case, the large number of subgroups to a work group and all of the meetings that they had really involved a lot of people. And so with the listening sessions and now with the, putting this out there to get other comments, you've really done a lot in terms of involving lots of folks, and that made it a little challenging for us sometimes, but we appreciate that and really congratulate you to get this far, and thank all the council members as well for all of their efforts. So with that, same rules as always. Use the raise your hand function. It's and again, the discussion, I know we've got a lot of other folks on the call, and that's terrific, but the discussion is just for the council members. So use the raise your hand feature. There were some comments and questions that were in the email that accompanied the draft plan last night. So you can address those questions if you like to, or if you just have some other, realizing that you just saw this last night, may not have had a chance to go through it in depth, but it could be high level comments. It could be deeper comments. You could address the questions that were in the email. And again, and this one, unlike some of the other ones, I took attendance. So if folks don't chime in, I may call on you at some point too, just to try to get your initial thoughts about this, because we really do want to try to get as much from you as we possibly can in this meeting, and then from the other comments that you submit going forward. So with that, enough speaking from me. So if you want to use the raise your hand feature, anybody wants to start us off with kind of your first impressions, high level comments, or are the big rocks the right rocks? Are we missing some rocks? I'm trying to fit the right metaphor here. Did we?
I have been informed by some of my director colleagues that I need to stop saying rocks. So I apologize. I do want to say too, if you have the the draft plan open from that you received last night, on page 12 of the PDF is where you can find the summary of the key focus areas, and so that might help all. And I like paper and I like stuff in front of me, so if anybody else does, that's where you would start.
Great, thanks. And again, if you're not speaking, please go to mute if you could. We appreciate that. Peck, you're up first.
Thanks. I just want to applaud the Eagle team and all the hard work they've done. Clearly very thoughtful, and a lot of time went into that. And of course, everyone else here. Very nice to see this coming together. I just wanted to start, because it might provide a framework for us talking about 22 to 30 goals, which I agree is where we really should focus, is the philosophy behind not having interim goals detailed, quantified. In other words, by a certain date. You do that, obviously, for some things, the percentage of carbon emissions overall. But I wonder if we should be, is it just because we feel like the legislature is completely out of our control and we can't really say when they'll do what? In other words, can we make this more aspirational? One of the reasons I'm asking is, when you look into or you look at commentary about other states and their actions, a lot of times it really focuses on what are they setting out to do by when, and everything else is kind of like, okay, it'll get, it's very vague and who knows if it'll ever get done. And I'm just asking if there's a reason why we can't tighten it up, and if we should go through and see where we can provide more dates. And maybe it's just I haven't been in Michigan long enough. Maybe it's just fool's errand to do that. Thank you.
I guess
And I
I'd
don't know.
ask. I have a question.
Feel free, any of the Eagle folks, if you want to jump in and respond to that, or else Mary, if you want to add on to that, go ahead.
Jonathan, what do you mean by that? I mean, interim goals. What kind of interim goals you want? Because you have a pretty rapid goal between 22 and 25, which I think is kind of interesting. I'm curious as to how you think we're going to get to 28% reduction in that period of time. So what do you?
No, I'm not talking about that one. I think that one's great. That's sort of the example I would cite as the way to do it. But let's say we, just for kicks, we didn't have a lot of time to read this documents, but like if you go to fleet transportation, the deadlines are 2035 and 2040. Okay, but most people are going to sort of say, yeah, it's just kicking the can down the road. I'm saying that not because I'm trying to criticize anyone, but just because it doesn't sound very aggressive.
I would just say
and I think we can go through every one of
these
and say something like.
I would align with the EPA regulations that are coming out. I mean, I would not set additional goals, just align with what the agencies are rolling out. The EPA finalized their greenhouse gas requirements at the end of last year. NHTSA will be finalizing this year. I recommend that we align with those goals and their year-by-year targets in there.
Yeah, Cynthia, I think for me, that was one of the things that was a little bit of a concern as we look at this is, we've talked about this in previous meetings is, okay, what if there's already stuff out there, we should align with that and not set our own targets.
Yeah, and I'm not even saying, we need year by year, although I think that would be great. Don't get me wrong. But I'm just saying that, we got a lot of actions in this part of the plan. This is where the rubber hits the road. Why not, try at least say what we're going to do by 2025, 2030 for every one of them.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of actions in the entire package. There's a lot to do in this. And I think that it's a lot. My question is, how do you take it in manageable chunks if this is really what you're going to end up requesting or asking us to do? The first jump at 28% reduction by 2025, I got to tell you, that's a pretty big deal when most of us are looking at trying to decarbonize 15% on our entire global population by, 2030. So, there's a lot here. What are the key ones? In my mind, it's like you're going to have to say, okay, these are the first three that we're going to work on. These are the next three, peck to your commentary of, okay, manageable chunks to really make some progress and then potentially set targets in each of those.
I misunderstood then. What you're suggesting is that every department in the Michigan government will be achieving, say, that 28% by that time. Is that what you're suggesting?
No, that's not what I'm suggesting. I'm just saying, what I'm saying is, and I did not, I will say I'll precurse my comments by saying I didn't have a lot of time to digest this. Okay, so I would ask that, that I knew it was coming, so I'd set aside some time, but not enough to really give you, detailed commentary. But when I read this and, a couple of things came to mind. One was Cynthia's comment. What are we aligning to in terms of other regulations that are already out there? That's not clear in here. And I think that needs to be very important, a piece of this, because a lot of us, who are global companies, we're trying to manage what's in each state, plus also on the federal level, we need to really give people some certainty to say, look, we're not going to add an extra layer on top of you. That's not going to help us. I think the second thing is there's too much in here. I mean, you're going to have to really get granular about, hey, in the energy production section, we're going to pick this one, and we're going to do these things over the next 5 years to get us to the neutrality piece of it. I mean, there's a lot of work left to do here to map this baby out to get to carbon neutrality by 2050. You know, the other thing that came to mind for me is, okay, what is the plan, or kind of what's the plan are we looking at for funding all this? Because there's a lot in here that's going to need funding. You know, and you cannot ask private sector to pick the tab up on this solely. I mean, it's not possible for the amount of work that we have to do and the strides that we have to make. When you're talking also too, are you talking about scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 emissions for this, for GHG emissions sum total, or are you just talking scope 1 and scope 2? From a reduction target.
I'm going to let James chime in if he would like to talk about how he's envisioning it, and while he is potentially looking for a mute button. I want to say that we are getting we're fortunate to be staffing up in order to support this on the implementation side from an Eagle perspective. And so I guess one of the things I should have said at the outset too is I know that I think we'd all like to see X plus Y equals Z. And that is something that given, you know, what we had in terms of kind of tools to start with, what we wanted to do with the plan instead was start at the top as opposed to working our way up from the bottom. And so we are working to have that modeling foundation to work up from the bottom as well. We just don't have all of it for the purposes of the plan right now. So James, I don't know if you've got more you want to chime in there with.
No, that's about what I was going to say, is that, you know, we're just now getting kind of a data scientist on board, and we're hoping to kind of get more detailed. Obviously, certain areas kind of require an implementation team and better definition to what goals. And I really kind of reaffirm kind of Mary's point on trying to align wherever possible with, you know, national goals and other efforts that are out there to make sure that you're not getting kind of a checkered board of requirements kind of depending on where you're operating. So we'll be addressing both those. On the inventory side and kind of the accounting side, that's one of the areas that we've already identified as potentially ripe for kind of an implementation team, so that we can work with kind of the private sector and individuals to try to kind of get more clarity to those numbers.
And just to add that, one thing I think that would be helpful when we talk about reducing the greenhouse gases by 28%, I believe that's from a 2005 baseline. And so I think that would be helpful to lay that out, and so that people, you know, they're not overwhelmed by seeing that large percentage.
It is implied, I think, but I think your point is really good. We just need to be more explicit on things. One of the things that we did at University of Michigan was scope 1, 2, and 3 that might work well in this report too, to your point, James, is just to say that by 2023 or end of 2023, we'll have more detailed modeling and targets or something. In other words, you can buy more time because you're going to get a lot of positive feedback just by setting the big goal, the top goal, and the 28% and the 50%. But you can give everyone a little assurance that, hey, we're going to have more detailed. And the second thing we're going to do in that exercise is align with other guidance that we have from the federal government, et cetera. So that would take care of a lot of the uncertainty that you're hearing right now, or at least postpone it. But don't postpone it until 2040. I mean, I'm just joking, but, you know, postpone it just a year or two.
And this was a really good discussion. If you want to kind of like go back on something that somebody else has said, just use the raise your hand, and I'll ask you if it's a point on what that person is asking about, just to sort of keep me from getting fired here during the middle of the meeting. So that would be great. Thanks. Mary, can I follow up on one point that you made while we're waiting for other people to jump into the queue? You made the point about too much in here, too many things in here. I wanted to follow up on that a little bit, you know, just in terms of I mean, most of these plans that you're seeing in other places, some of them have way more things in here than are part of the draft that you've gotten. So the question becomes, what are the things that you think are too much that are in here, if I can put you on the spot like that?
Yeah, no, that's no problem, Doug, and I'd be happy to share my thoughts on this. I think, as you're looking at each one of these buckets, and as we were going through all the work groups too, I mean, some of the work groups were coming with 70, 80 recommendations. Yeah. I mean, I will say you've done a yeoman's job about getting these down to, half a dozen or 4 or 5. I mean, that's no small affair. Okay, let's just take the energy production one to start with. Okay, what's it going to take to get the state electric, to 100% renewable energy? I mean, what's that really going to take? What's it really going to take to triple the state's recycling rate of 40 to 45%? Which one of these contributes? What I would say is, prioritization is going to be really important, but the energy, the effort, and the cost that's associated even with any one of these 5 in the energy production bucket could take over all the time that the director has for any of her team. I mean, I'm thinking about what energy and effort it takes for us to decarbonize, or Cynthia decarbonize, or Ron to decarbonize, or Brandon. As I look at this, how are you going to prioritize under each one of these, and where are you going to put your energy and effort? What I fear will happen is that it will be diluted. You won't see any measurable progress, or as much progress as that you could see if you said, you know what, these are the buckets that we have. Here's what we're going to focus on first, second, and third. And this is how they're going to sort of map out towards that 2050. This is the one where we can get the biggest bang for our buck. So we're going to focus our energy here. Then we're going to move to this one. Then we're going to move to this one. I think that's going to be really important as you further outline the plan. But there's a lot in here. There's a lot in here. And I would, really challenge my other committee members to offer their comments on this too. I know I've talked to some of you offline about, as we've gone through this over the last 12 months, but that's a lot. Realistically speaking, what is it that you're really going to go focus on in this?
Okay. Thanks for doing that. Thanks for letting me put you on the spot.
I just want to chime in real quick, Doug. I think this is really helpful, Mary, and I agree. And I think what you've already seen is us, through lifting up the recommendations, but prioritizing key recommendations, again, working through that, how do you simplify? How do you focus yourself? You can't do thousands of things. So how do you do the ones that are most important? I just want to mention on the renewable energy procurement for the state of Michigan, that's actually already done. That one could actually be checked off. The state of Michigan entered into a renewable contract with utility for the state of Michigan's energy use. But your point is well taken, which is, how do we make sure that we're putting our time and energy in the place that's going to make the biggest impact and going to have the largest, move us forward in the largest way possible in order to get to our goals. And so, yeah, that's a really good thing to think about and try to figure out how to put a finer point on it.
And how to balance, because it reminds me of that line from the American President where Michael J. Fox said, "We don't have time to do one thing at a time." So how do you balance that and the need to get everything done with prioritizing and walking that line? Cynthia, go ahead.
Just to add to that, one thing that we might want to do is when you have the data scientists when they come on board this month, that might be to have them to do the CO2 impact for each of these, and that can help us prioritize as we move on.
Right. Jim Harrison. Jim, if you're talking, you're on mute.
There we go. Sorry about that.
There you are. All right.
I would certainly, I support what Cynthia is saying. I think that's really, really helpful in being able to quantify exactly what we're trying to get accomplished. And, to add on to what Mary Draves is saying is, at a time when we are adding new renewable generation is also a time in which electricity consumption is predicted to expand significantly as we begin to decarbonize. So that puts added constraints on not just on there's naturally a difference between what's technically possible, and then we have this siting issue and zoning issue in Michigan as well, that I know that we should spend time figuring out how we best manage those issues. A couple of things, and this is not at all to be like fly specking at all, but in the narrative, there's a couple of places where we talk about carbon neutrality and zero carbon, and they are not the same thing. And I think that the references should be made to carbon neutrality, because I think that's both follows IPCC as well as I think the governor's executive order. I'm curious as well, and maybe it's embedded in, I didn't have a chance to get through everything in relation to the draft, and it may be embedded a little bit further in, but in relation to some recommendations on energy intensive industry, natural working lands, forest products, circular food economy, that kind of thing. I don't necessarily see those buckets specifically identified. No, naturally I see identified in the business section in relation to energy waste, energy efficiency, and clean energy hubs. I don't know if that's necessarily by design, or if it's like work that is still in progress. I'm referencing myself back to our meeting of December 3rd, where there was a pretty good matrix in relation to each one of the 5 areas that we've been talking about, and then some recommendations that I think would a review of that would be really helpful in looking at the recommendation to the governor's office in the draft itself. And when bringing somebody in and doing some data analysis, they might as well be able to look at these recommendations from that document to say, well, you can expect to get X amount of carbon reduction if you look at this area or that, to help the overall goal. On the workforce itself, I think it would be helpful to have language that talks not just about training, but also workforce development. There's a lot of work in here, and I want to say overall, this is really spectacular. I appreciate all the fellow council members' input and the work from all the agencies as well in Eagle. But workforce development, and also I think it's helpful to have language that talks about getting people developed and necessary training and support for in-demand jobs, not just training for green energy jobs in general, but for those jobs that are going to be in demand or are in demand. And I think that's really helpful in messaging with the public itself. It's like, we're not just training you for a job, we're training for an in-demand job as well. And I do think in relation to clean energy, my experience has been that the job growth really is not in clean energy generation. The job growth is going to be in grid technologies, distribution, transmission, distributed generation, those kinds of areas is which the job growth is. Utility workers represent all the investor-owned utilities, wind farms, those workers, and that's 50 people. So, and the mineral power plant is like 400. So in relation to generation, I think that we need to talk about EV infrastructure, EV, that kind of thing, as well as what the grid technologies are necessary to be able to have a more electrified, renewable system. Lastly, I think there should be some reference to not just renewables, but zero generation, possibly. I don't know if this tips us over low carbon or zero carbon. So for instance, long battery storage is something definitely that Michigan is significantly investing in and trying to figure out, the utilities are trying to figure out as well. That's not necessarily renewable energy itself. I mean, lithium ion batteries are not renewable energy, but they are part of the overall zero carbon sources of energy and balancing and providing ancillary services to the grid itself that you can't necessarily get from other renewable sources. So that's it. Thank you.
Right. Thanks, Jim. James or Director, any comments you want to make to what Jim said?
I would just say it's very helpful feedback. I took a bunch of notes, James.
Okay. Phil.
Thanks very much. First, I really want to acknowledge the amazing work that went into this. And I know a lot of that, there was probably a lot of last minute pulling a lot of things together from different sources, and just want to honor that. I have a few comments, some of them that are on the, I guess, the framing and the narrative, and some about the specific recommendations. And on the narrative and the way you set this up today, Liesl, and what's in the document that we saw, I just want to acknowledge and appreciate and encourage even more of the efforts to make this Michigan-centric, to talk about how we're leveraging our assets. We're, seeking to be leaders in certain industrial areas that come out of this, as well as, that we ought to really be thinking of us having a leadership role here. And I think there were really great efforts to bring that through, and also to acknowledge the need to address the real pressing and real today threats of climate on lots of people in the state, but also the benefits to the economy. I yearn for even more efforts to quantify some of those, because I think that's, if we can really show, and I think and hope that some of that modeling is out there, even if we are not commissioning new modeling. But let's talk about how many jobs are created by key elements of the plan. I think that's really important in a forward-looking way. In terms of the recommendations themselves, I want to say I think there's some very positive elements, some even surprising, that are in this that should be called out. The clean fuel standard. The fact that there is an attempt at an RPS in there, which I don't even think was in the work group recommendations. That's a positive. Recycling. But I want to, maybe slightly different than where Mary was going, I want to talk not in terms of how many recommendations, but how bold they are, and just give strong encouragement to, in a few areas, go bigger than we have here. I mean, there's in the narrative that you provided us, there's talk about wanting to make us head of the pack, or near the head of the pack. We have other states that have very ambitious plans, and just making sure in some key areas, it's clear that we're really striving for leadership. We're going to really push this thing forward in an aggressive way. I think there are examples of that in the plan. There are some other areas where I would suggest pushing further. And I think the challenge on Mary's dilemma of how many of these things can you attack is we don't have a lot of time. Now's the time. We're setting the blueprint here for the next decade at least and beyond. And so I'd encourage pushing out. And a couple areas that I'd suggest. One is, I think one of the biggest areas where there may be a gap in ambition is in the building and industrial, in the housing and building piece of this, and that I don't feel like it's really attacking as hard as we could the drive toward electrification. And I'll send some specific comments separately, because I, like everybody else, am just sort of going through all of this. But I think that's an area where I want to make sure what we've got in there actually gets us to where we need to be by 2030 in that sector, which is such a big, important contributor to GHGs. On the energy side of it, I think, Jim, I can't remember who said this, but I'd like to see us talk about zero carbon energy standard. And maybe what we have for 2030, maybe expand on that 2035 or so, 100%, a bigger number. Because I'm not as versed as others are in the modeling, but I think that's kind of where we need to go. I know we're disadvantaged in some ways as a state because of our current electricity makeup, but I'd like to see us push out on that and maybe even go sooner on the phasing out of coal. And then I guess just one other thing on the energy side that I'll highlight is some more specificity about requiring utilities to identify EJ communities that are at risk and in their service territory and do the health impact assessments and those sorts of things to really make that part of the requirement so that we are directly addressing those environmental justice related issues in the operating areas of the utilities. And I guess, sorry, I'm talking too long, but last thing I'd say is, I appreciate the initiative, really appreciate the initiative to put forth using the state as an example, leading on fleets and EV charging, and it runs all through the plan, and that is so much appreciated. What I think as we're looking forward to this and giving commentary in the next 48 hours, I think we should really look to make sure we've got the muscle and the ambition in there to achieve the goals we need to sector-wide, and that'll maybe create some pain for my industry friends because that's challenging. But I think we're all in this together, and this needs to be economy-wide to be able to get to those goals over time. And I think there may be some cases where we could add some of that muscle to the plan itself. Thanks.
Thanks, Phil. We'll go to Darrell and then to Ron. So Darrell.
Thank you, and I had to apologize for my tardiness. I was dealing with an emergency, but I'm glad I was able to make it. Not sure what everyone else has said, but just from hearing some of the comments, I think I agree with a lot. Particularly, actually, Phil's highlighted a few items I wanted to point out that I felt like were just missing from the report. So while there's electrification, a focus on electrification and transportation sector, that was pretty absent in the building or business and home section. One of the other areas I thought we could really call out and actually add recommendations. So great that we're increasing our EWR standards from 1% to 2% for electric and from 0.75 to 1% on gas. But really thinking about if we really want to think about transitioning all folks in Michigan in this energy economy, we need to think about folks that are suffering energy burden. So setting some specific energy efficiency targets or targets across the board for low income folks, but just using energy efficiency as an example, drilling down within those increases to goals for low income folks, that would be, I think, would also aid in that transition. But like others, I think there's some really good things. That 50% RPS increase, which was not expecting to see. I'm glad to see that there. I think the EV infrastructure goal to support 2 million vehicles. I think that's a really good goal, and definitely we'll talk to other folks offline and in terms of how that stacks up in terms of modeling that we're seeing. But I think this off rim, I think that looks really ambitious and a really good goal. But I will mostly save most of my comments for written. I'll submit them tomorrow. But I really want to harp on the energy burden focus. I think if we're going to really make sure that all folks can participate in as we're transitioning Michigan's entire state, we need to make sure that everybody will be able to do so. I think being really calling out and being really specific about how we're making sure low-income folks are able to participate is really going to be important. So, but I'll save the rest of my comments for written.
Thanks, Darrell. Let's see, go to Ron Vogelwade next, and then Carrie Dugan.
Thanks, appreciate it. You stole a little bit of mine there, Darrell. Thanks for those comments, especially on the burden portion. I think that was a portion that's missing in being more prescriptive within that section. I know we have the just 40 there as well, but I think it is appropriate to call that out and how we make sure that happens in the right place. One other, it's a very specific comment, maybe along the lines of the carbon neutrality or zero carbon, is the EWR. So EWR doesn't necessarily, energy waste reduction doesn't necessarily equal energy demand reduction, and I think we use that interchangeably in this document versus flexibility. If we're gonna, and I do applaud the very aggressive, let's say 50%, some of the others on clean energy transition. I think it's needed and is warranted in some of the sense of that's going to drive a lot of, let's say, investment choices that may not have to get down to the end consumer, and can be done at scale. But I think you're going to need that flexibility, and it doesn't necessarily just mean reduced demand, and therefore really looking at some of those aspects of dynamic demand response as well. So how do we create a more dynamic and resilient grid while we're doing that? And I think that's going to be critical to hit some of those more aggressive, let's say, clean energy transition in a faster time frame. So that's just maybe a specific one there on being a little bit tied to this EWR existing programs versus looking at a more broader definition of EWR to include flexibility or time of use or those sort of concepts. So other than that, I think in a similar vein, provide a few other comments here or there, but also applaud the team for, I know trying to boil down 550 things or more to 50 or less is admirable, and obviously we'll have a lot more time to discuss implementation over the time period. Thanks.
Ron, did you have any additional thoughts on kind of when you talk about more dynamic, more resilient, how you do that? What are some of the ways you would get there?
Yeah, I mean, specifically there is just looking at time of use. Okay. We start looking at also flexible demand. So how do we incentivize when we look at efficient products, but ones that are also more flexible to allow for that transition to happen? Those are keys when you talk about that dramatic of a change of electrification and decarbonization. Those are going to be needed. Otherwise, we'll ramp up on a high cost, and I think will really impact that burden comment that Daryl made if we have to ramp up that quickly, and that with the existing solution and the cost profiles they have today. If we do that virtually, I think, or not virtually, or flexibly, that will allow that to happen. And so I think some more open capability for utilities to do different type of rate designs is one, time of use, dynamic or flexibility within, and the distributed portion of that, I think is key parts of that.
Got it. Okay, thank you. Let's see. I'll go to Carrie and then Marnice.
Thank you, Doug. It's awesome that I'm following Ron because he and I have had some of these conversations in the last year. Let me say a couple things. They're probably not terribly coherent, but here you go. One is I didn't get through the whole document. I was speed reading ahead of the call, so this is going off of what I did read. Question is, what is this document going to communicate to the public? The other 9 point whatever million of us that aren't going to read all of this. I'm really curious to see what of the top line and how they hit. So what are the tweets that will emphasize what I've heard multiple times on this call, which is Michigan as a leader state. That's what we're trying to convey. I think to Mary's point about it's not all going to be the government doing this. So how do we frame this as Michigan is investment ready in this new economy? So that's really, really important to me. Another thing I just want to say, and I said this to some of the folks from NBDC actually earlier today, in terms of that national leadership and the conversation around, you guys call it alignment, I would say how does this harmonize with the Biden administration agency goals? I would say that's great, but I also would like to see Michigan lead, so where we can stretch and actually be aggressive and be the model state. I'd like to see that happen. And one area where I think there's a unique opportunity is between sort of the Earth shot, you guys know I do a little moonlighting with the Department of Energy, and the Justice 40 platform. I think if those two things can get married up in Michigan, that is a huge win. And I don't know that any other state could say they've captured that yet. So Daryl, your point about the energy burden, I think we have a real leapfrog / slingshot opportunity in Michigan to get our communities that maybe haven't found religion on wind or solar, but get them ready on things like green hydrogen or other of the forthcoming breakthrough technology areas, and at the same time taking care of our environmental justice communities and the workforce opportunities. I did see some of the overall narrative come through in the first couple of pages, the framing with that sort of compassion that Quentin always speaks of about our competitive advantages as a state, but also, and our water as one of our strengths, and also but the protection that we need to take care of. So I really do look at this as an economic development document at the end of the day. So I was actually pretty pleased in terms of what I saw there. But going back to my other point, which is making sure that it's showing us as investment ready to the folks that are looking to make these key investments. Because there's a lot of money out there. So I just want us to be ready for it. I think I've said everything I wrote down on my little note. I think I'll go on mute now, but hopefully that was enough to chew on until I can actually read the dang thing.
Thanks, Carrie. Marnice.
Thank you so much, Carrie. I actually agree with a lot of what you said, but I want to go back to a point where Mary was chiming in. I'm very process oriented, and I like to set SWOT goals, but I think this would be useful if we, and I know this is a lot of work, this is very ambitious, and I appreciate everybody who leaned into a lot of this. I think we need to really get down to the specifics of how we're going to achieve these goals. I don't know how that's going to look, who lap that is going to land in, but I think we need to really get specific on how we're going to achieve these. And like Carrie said, I do believe this is an opportunity to be a pioneer. So I wouldn't use the Biden administration as a baseline personally. I would like for us to create our own path, and we can do that by making sure that we're lifting up, of course, Justice 40, but also infusing EJ equity into all these different buckets that is listed. And so I think this would make us really a leader within, the United States. I look at states like Illinois, because they're doing some really great things there, but I know we have a different political climate here in Michigan. So I would take another look at this with the EJ equity lens for the next pass through of comments, because the community that we're serving, or when you have public comment for this, they're definitely going to really look for all of that in these different buckets. So I yield.
Thanks. I don't know, Director or James, to Marnice's point about process and how some of these things get done and how more specifics get generated. I know you've thought about this. I don't know if you want to talk through that a little bit, and perhaps the role that the council here will play in that going forward.
Yeah, I can take a first shot. I think Marnice made a few really good points. In particular, how do we go and look through and make sure that we've got that environmental justice lens on everything. So appreciate that. Also, this conversation that I've heard from a few council members about that implementation. So, the draft plan goes to the governor. We have conversation about what ends up being in the final plan. That we're thinking a lot about that implementation component. So what are the recommendations that need teams? And in our mind, it's teams that are made up of state government as well as people outside of state government, so that we are gathered around the pieces that we've got to pick up and really run with quickly in order to make a big impact. And so we're thinking about, what do those implementation teams look like? What's the duration? What are the topics that in particular need implementation teams? And we're going to want to work with council members and with others to make sure that we've got the people that really can make a difference assembled to be part of that. So James, I don't know if there was more you want to add there that could help kind of illuminate next steps.
No, that was perfect. Really, the more we've gotten into this, we realize there's just so many efforts going on across the state, private, public, local, national, that really you're just looking for where's the state most helpful in kind of facilitating reaching these goals. So as Lisa said, really trying to identify how many implementation teams do we think we can handle? Where would we get the biggest bang for our buck as far as state resources? and then just kind of joining the efforts that are out there. And so at the end of the day, maybe it looks a little bit more like a climate process than a climate plan in a way. It's just because we want to just kind of plug into a lot of the good work that's going on out there, but also try to identify areas where maybe what's being neglected. And, you know, the comments on kind of the EJ equity aspect of a lot of times, if you're only working with the people that have brought themselves to the table, well, some people just maybe don't have the time or the bandwidth to come to the table yet. Where do we need to reach out and make sure that we're getting that input and designing programs that's going to include everybody?
Thanks. A couple quick housekeeping things. Ron and Marnese, your hands are still up. I didn't know if you had follow-up points you wanted to make. It's okay if you don't. I was just checking. And just to remind folks that that this part of the discussion, the council meeting here, is just for the council members only. I know I said that at the beginning, but just want to reiterate that. And there will be additional opportunities to weigh in from a public standpoint. I think some of those will be announced on Friday, either both in terms of public listening sessions and how other comments can get back to the Eagle folks. So thanks for understanding there. Sam Stopler.
Thanks, Doug. Thanks everybody for sharing your perspectives. They're really helpful for me. I share the sentiment that many have already spoken of, that I feel like I want a lot more time with this before I can have some better or more complete response to it. But I wanted to follow others' suit and share two things that come to mind in my initial skim. One follows on what Peck and Mary started with about prioritization and staging, and also that's intimately related with, I think, bang for the buck, and where we can have the most value add now and in the future. I just want to say I support. I think while there's a lot in here, I don't want to like delete those things, but I very much support analysis that aids in prioritization and staging. But the point I really want to make is that I think such analysis would probably end up supporting, among other things, the notion that the cost of abatement, a cost of emissions reduction, is lower in the here and now in transportation and in electricity. And that in some other sectors that we've talked about, I think industry, buildings, agriculture, among other places, perhaps. And this is not, I don't mean to say every action fits this, but I think in some of those other sectors that are beyond transportation and electricity, that the cost of emissions reduction is currently higher. And that the game in those sectors, and I'm working off what I think is, I don't know if I can say consensus, but a lot of environmental economists, colleagues that I look to and read perspectives of, I think the game there is where costs are currently higher, we should be trying to subsidize innovation and pushing down those costs with R&D subsidies and the sort of tech hubs we talk about and labor training, et cetera. And rather than implementation, rather than implementing the technology or whatever that reduces emissions, and that transportation and electricity, that is to say grid decarbonization and electrification of vehicles, is the thing that is lowest cost per ton of abatement right now, to a first approximation. That's sort of a framing that I personally take to this, and I wonder if there's use in, if that has like rhetorical value in the plan to distinguish and to help explain priorities, if we agree with those priorities. The second thing is shorter. Rate design, to my best abilities to use Control F in this document, is not heavily featured. And I think, I just personally think, and I've said this before, that rate design is more important than the proposal reflects currently, especially with regard to equity. Because if we're going to look at the average cost of abatements to help prioritize, that's not in and of itself guaranteeing equity in any sort of way. But rate redesign to make electricity more affordable regardless of the other stuff that we're doing, is insurance against that. And I think really, personally, I think regardless of what emissions reducing actions we take, we should redesign rates to make them more affordable. Thanks.
Thanks, Sam. And when you're talking about rate redesign, are you talking, I mean, Ron talked about time of use and flexible demand and some of the things that lower the cost overall. Seems like you're taking that a step further to also talk about it in terms of not just lowering for everybody, but also focusing on certain income qualifications and things like that.
Yeah, that's right, Doug. My point was to focus on equity, on making rates lower for those with less money. But that being said, I 100% agree with Ron, because I think, as you just said, Doug, those are ways to cost effectively reduce emissions, is by incentivizing people to not use electricity when it's really costly to produce.
Most expensive, right? Okay. Thanks, Sam. Appreciate that. Let me see. I don't have anybody in the queue, so I'll give about 5 seconds if anybody wants to jump in before I call on somebody, because we really do want to try to get as many different perspectives as we can, and that's been okay. Peck, you had a point you want to raise, and then I'm gonna go to some folks who haven't talked yet. But Peck, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I mean, just one thing to think about doing that
Sure.
we did in the Michigan plan was we compared our plan with all the peers. And we did that at some level of granular texture. And that helps do two things. It helps you make sure you don't forget something that might be low-hanging fruit, or that might be just a source of undue criticism. But it also allows you to gauge how much a leader you really are. Because I really do like these comments about, positioning Michigan as a leader in this area. This is a way to make Michigan's economy a stronger economy by leading in this area. And it's going to be very hard. We're going to let someone else is going to do this for us, and it'll be in the media. But we have control of it if we do it. And I'll bet you someone in Eagle has already done it. And it might be really good to stick it in the report or make it available to everyone on this call in the council, so that we can all agree that, we're where we want to be in the pack. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Peck. Brandon, you popped up top of right on my screen, so I'm gonna go to you now. So please feel free.
Yeah, appreciate all the work, Liesl, James, and everyone. I understand how massive the problem is that we're trying to solve, and how to put it in words is not an easy task. So appreciate everybody's efforts on that. Couple quick reactions. I actually like the idea of setting a bold renewable goal. 50% is actually, even Consumers has a currently filed integrated resource plan that is very heavy on solar, that doesn't quite achieve this 50% goal. But I like the idea of having the state put a stake in the ground on renewables and or on low carbon electricity to some of the others. I think either can work. Renewables, the politics seems a little easier at times, but ultimately we really want zero carbon electricity. The challenge, and I think somebody put their finger on it, is, as I see through 2030, is siting. We've got these plans which have been approved by the Public Service Commission to go out and build a lot of solar energy. And we've been seeing a confluence of whether it's local concern about zoning or supply chain issues that are impacting the solar sector, or even interconnection with the regional transmission grid. We still don't have any of these things built, even though we've done RFPs back through 2019. So I think that is one of those areas where implementation, where we need to dig into others' good points. Like, let's dig in on a few of these where we actually get an implementation plan to figure out how to do it. And I think renewable electricity is clearly a big rock. And to me, the single biggest challenge of this decade is going to be making sure that we get those things sited and built. So that's one area. And then also sort of related to that is, you know, affordability and making sure everybody, you know, that we don't add to the energy burden, both for low income customers or for competitive businesses, you know, that are potentially looking to site new clean energy manufacturing industries here in Michigan. And so one of the things that I think is also a global comment I would make is calling out the partnership opportunities with the federal government and the role of the federal government, both with the last plan, but also, you know, both the bipartisan infrastructure bill and the opportunities there, but also some of the needs for like extending the renewable energy tax credits, which is really going to help with the affordability of renewables in what's called the Build Back Better plan. And so I think, you know, diving into leadership role, and maybe it's, again, really getting deep on how are we going to hit 2 million electric vehicles in the state? And what is that going to require from siting? What is that, you know, and actually identifying the opportunities that the federal government is going to provide funding, and having a more detailed plan that seems to serve Michigan's, you know, if we can really be a leader in vehicle electrification, given our auto industry expertise, that seems like a real synergy where we can dig deep and have a clear implementation plan. So, and agree with Sam's overarching take on the environmental economics, that electricity and transport really are at scale where I think we can make a huge difference in the 2020s. So I would support also really leaning into those two areas. So those are my high level views. Like everybody, I will dig in and send comments to the team tomorrow, but nice work, and look forward to rolling up my sleeves with everybody to make this happen.
Thanks. Any quick thoughts on how to solve that siting issue with either renewables or transmission? Everybody's looking for that. So if you've got it, you know, it's very valuable.
I don't know that I have a silver bullet. You know, it's you know, certain states have gone to statewide siting processes. Given Michigan's history of local control, I understand how challenging that is politically. But it is it's a real challenge. So maybe some kind of standards or incentives to standardize the siting and to have reasonable siting, and have some state public policy is, I think, something we have to at least examine. I think we have to work with local governments to make that work, though. So it's a sticky one. I think that's one where we need to bring a lot of people together, understand what might be needed, and everybody needs to probably give and take a little bit.
Great, thanks. Let's see. Frank, you have the misfortune of being on my screen, so I'll go to you next.
Well, thank you, but Brandon there kind of stepped in on took a little bit of my thunder there on the comments with folks talking about the partnerships with the federal government. I noticed that we mentioned local government here in this plan kind of briefly, but I do think that's that tension sort of between our you know, many jurisdictions of local government and then the Lansing sort of policy and direction that we want to take. That's, you know, there's just a natural tension there, and how we can incorporate that. I don't want to say overcome it. I think it can be a strength, but I know that the plan touches on it a little bit, and not, you know, just in terms of citing at least, but also the other areas of the plan. How do we incorporate those local units, those townships and counties, cities and villages? This just was my first thought on a quick brush through.
Great, thanks. Tanya Pozlowski. Tanya is still with us?
I am. I'm sorry.
All right. That's okay.
The mute button always trips me up. to just reiterate appreciation for all of the work that has gone into this as well. And just my fellow committee members who've really provided some fantastic feedback. I was originally looking also at really how to better incorporate some of the energy justice aspects of this into all of the sections as well, that I know has been a recommendation and that I think is really important. And I like Sam's reiteration of the need to consider the rates for as part of the bigger package in the energy transition, and how key that's going to be for those who are already struggling to pay their bills today. So other than reiterating some of the key points I think folks have made, I've just been thinking through a little bit. I know Ron was talking about the importance of flexibility and how we're thinking about the energy components of this, and wanted to get a little bit more on that aspect because it is so key to the transition. Every aspect of the transition here is making sure that all of the types of technologies that we have to allow that kind of flexibility, and go with that, I think, is the possibility of, rate issues associated with that, as more of the generation and the control will be in the hands of customers. So I guess I'll be looking in my finer review of the plan for whether there are other ways that we can try to incentivize. And I think mainly thinking on the utility side of adopting some more of these types of technologies, and maybe more quickly, to both accelerate, the carbon reduction goals, but I think it's also a really powerful component as we think about the justice component of this as well.
Great. Thanks, Tanya. Peck, your hand's still up. Did you have another comment or?
No, I apologize.
No worries at all. I didn't call on any of the folks from the agencies. I didn't know if any of you had any comments you wanted to make at this time, or otherwise, I wanted to go back to something that Carrie said, but let me ask if any of the agency folks have any comments that they'd like to make. Don't want to exclude you. And are there any, because there may have been people that joined after, are there any non-agency council members that I missed? I was trying to catch up with people as they came on after roll call, but I wanted to make sure there wasn't anybody that I missed from a non-agency perspective. Okay. Well, any of the agency folks, feel free to jump in at any time. But Carrie said something that I thought was really interesting, and where I think this group could also be really helpful. What is the plan as members of the public who haven't spent a year doing this and haven't participated in all kinds of work groups and worked through all the weeds of different issues? What does the doc communicate to the public? What are the top lines? What are the top takeaways from folks, and how could that be different, or how could that be better? And I was curious if anybody, I thought that was an interesting comment from Carrie. She didn't answer her own question other than talking about Michigan being a leader, which I think is and being investment ready, but are there other themes that we're thinking that the readers of this plan who haven't spent a year working on it could take away? Maybe that's not the right question to ask, but it was curious to me as I heard that.
I'll offer some.
Go, Phil. Thank you. Thanks for bailing me out.
No. I don't want to just throw out random thoughts here, but I've got some ideas, and I'll send over some candidates. But I think it's the right question to answer here, or to ask, is what's the Twitter label? What's the bumper sticker on this thing? What's the thing we're going to remember that characterizes this plan? And I think it's going to lead on economy and jobs and justice, probably.
One thing I might color in on that is,
sure.
So it's like within the state, the 9.9 million other people not on this call. What does it mean for them? And then outside the state, as I said, for Bill Gates and all of our friends that have bags of money and are looking to invest, what does it say to them? So, multiple messages.
Or the federal government that a few of you have talked about wanting to take advantage of the opportunities that their dollars are presenting now to help move things along. Okay. Any thoughts anybody else has on that? Peck, you unmuted. Do you have some thoughts there?
I keep messing up. I don't know if we should be relying too much on the federal government, though. That's all I would say in terms of the Build Back Better. I mean, I would love to see it, but right now, boy.
But even DOE for example, has a ton of money in things, everything from transmission to EV infrastructure build out to hydrogen hubs and other loan programs to help renewable. I mean, there's just there are myriad pots of money that they're actively trying to partner with states to figure out how to get it out the door. So, yeah, I mean, none of us has the right crystal ball on Build Back Better. Jim, and then Brandon.
Yeah, Doug. So on that, we've hit on this a number of times of private-public partnerships, federal government, state business community, state, federal government. If there's an opportunity for I don't know, a clearinghouse or some kind of opportunity for businesses to understand what is available out of DOE. You're right. There's a ton of programs at the DOE outside of the Earthshot stuff, or in addition to that, that is available that a lot of folks really don't know, what that consists of, and that could very well help us move the ball forward, both in new technologies, new zero or low carbon technologies, as well as our emissions reductions and attracting businesses and job growth. Outside of that, in relation to, this is just, I'm certainly no expert in this at all, but in relation to message testing, I think Carrie's actually hitting on something that I had some conversation earlier with folks about this, that this needs to be applicable not just for folks that are opting in, but folks that are thinking about just in general. They're thinking about roads and the economy right now. I mean, that's what a lot of people, Michiganders, are thinking about. And our top line items on competitiveness, opportunity for communities and workers, the impacts, pocketbook, message testing this plan and incorporating it in those 5 elements, I think is across the state, I think is really important to get some feedback from folks, whether that's under some orchestrated focus group work or some kind of message testing, so that people begin to understand that, hey, this works for me if I'm in Southeast Michigan, or if I'm in West Michigan, or I'm up in the UP, right? This needs to be somehow, right, that what's in it for me, for every Michigander, something. And I think that's one reason why the work groups basically covered the gambit of Michigan's economy of the sector, of where people are kind of employed outside of, retail sector itself necessarily. So I think that those are things in which some next steps here are really helpful and that would help develop a broader, longer term narrative, and then buy-in, right, for the public to be behind this as well. Thanks.
Thanks, Jim. Brendan.
Yeah, just building off that a little bit and building off, James's point earlier that there's a lot going on. And one of the things that we should try to identify is where can the state truly make a difference in facilitating? And I think one of those might be this helping public, private, nonprofit entities navigate some of these federal funding opportunities. I know even a large business like Consumers Energy, we're not very adept at understanding the DOE grant programs and the EPA grant programs. It's not something that historically we've done. And I can certainly imagine a small business or a school district or a local unit of government is not very adept at that. And, you know, I think the state could play a significant coordinating role in both leveraging the bipartisan infrastructure funds, and if we do get Build Back Better to some degree, helping to understand how we can kickstart things. And so that would be, you know, whether that's with vehicle electrification. We heard from Treasury last week about some of the work that Larry Steckelberg is helping to lead on community transitions away from power plants. There might be a series of specific areas that the state says we really want to focus on X, Y, and Z, and make a targeted, you know, approach that has broadly supported proposals where I feel like state government, whether that's the energy office or others, might be really well positioned to help play that collaboration and coordination role.
Yeah, why don't I jump on that one?
Please.
Feels like a good place to get in. So, first off, we've been having more formal conversations about how to support applicants for water infrastructure dollars coming from EPA. We've got a water infrastructure conference that we're planning in May, and then have been able to work with some coordinators to figure out, you know, how do we support communities as they're thinking through their SRF application. So why do I bring that up? I think it's just kind of one piece of the federal dollars, you know, the other piece being, as you correctly point out, Brandon, like the DOE dollars, EECBG, SEP, you know, the laundry list of acronyms. We had a discussion, I don't know, it was a week or two ago about, you know, do we use the implementation teams for grant response? And my inclination is no, because my inclination is responding to our federal friends to be able to get in line for some of those dollars. We're going to need to move a whole lot faster. I mean, I don't have all those deadlines in front of me, but I just anticipate that those deadlines are going to be like pretty rapid. I do think that we at state government would be glad to play a convening role. You know, obviously some things are for private sector to apply for, some things are for public sector to apply for. As Carrie says in the chat, you know, the universities are really important partners here too. And likely we will be more successful from a state perspective if we've got sort of an interdisciplinary approach to what some of those grant opportunities might look like. So I'm definitely interested in how do we put that piece together and support from a state government perspective. And I'm guessing that my colleagues in other departments would feel really similarly, because we just want to position Michigan to be the most successful as possible when we're looking at all those federal dollars. How do we make them kind of go the extra mile here from a Michigan perspective? So I'm definitely interested. So maybe since I've got the mic for a second, I'll move back to something that has come up a couple of times, which is how do we message the plan? We've talked a couple of times with the council about our intent to build it like a Russian nesting doll. And let's just say that, you know, Doug definitely comes up with the best imagery. So there was one earlier today where I'm like, wow, that's another good one, Doug. I meant to write it down. I don't know if I did. But the Russian nesting doll concept. So, you know, to start, you know, there are people that are going to need this communicated in a tweet. There are people that are going to want, you know, the 30-page plan plus the 40-page appendix that articulates all the work that the work groups did, because they did a lot of work. So, you know, we've got those two ends of the spectrum. It's our intent to build components of it that can be peeled out so that you can have, you know, 2 pages or 10 pages, you know, or 50 pages, depending upon what it is that you're needing to communicate. We've also been working through, excuse me, I'm working on a little bit of cold. We've also been working with our web design team to figure out how to build a robust website that might be more interactive and be able to kind of convey very visually the work of the council, and then also take us into the implementation teams. And, you know, as I've been thinking about it, like phase 2, we will not have any of that to unveil between here and Friday. But listening to all of you talk about the message how are we communicating, who are we talking to? All of that's really helpful to inform our team thinking through how do we structure that in order to be most effective. So anyway, just wanted to offer that up. I'd also say that many of your teams in your capacity have communication ability and insight. We're always really interested in what you're aware of and what you think about because in many cases you're way more practiced at this type of thing than we are from a state government perspective. So anyway, just want to mention that too. We're always interested in that type of feedback that can help us get more solid in what we're saying. So.
Anybody have any reaction to that in terms of the different types of documents or thoughts about what else might be effective in terms of the message?
It's Quentin Messer from MEDC.
Yeah.
The apologies, I had to join late, just like everybody, juggling a lot of different things. We'll happily come alongside the team at Eagle or whoever to provide whatever capacity or help on messaging. I do think that we should always keep in mind, if you're explaining, you're losing. I think that one of the things that we have to do is really make sure that this is relevant across the state. And I think there are opportunities to sort of connect. I know we talked a lot about the equity, but I also probably missed a conversation about the rural communities and the impact it has on, agribusiness and farmers and small businesses. So people who may not ordinarily see themselves necessarily in this could. I also think there's a tourism angle as well. So I think there's a way to make sure that we're true to ourselves, but we don't hit triggers that allow people to shut down, and we can sort of have, without it being watered down to nothingness, but we can have something robust. But as Carrie mentioned, that allows Michigan to slingshot. So, Director Clark knows how to find me. She probably is sick of finding me now, but I'm willing to help on the messaging. But I do think that we should keep just a simple frame of relevancy for the broadest group of audience. And if we're explaining, we're losing. Thanks.
Good point. Thank you. Any other thoughts anyone has? If not, I do want to point out some of the questions that, and not necessarily for today, but as you're looking at comments, a couple of the lenses to look through. We've talked a lot today about the different pieces, and the key focus areas, and what is the plan missing? What more does it need? And you focused in on a lot of those things today. But then a couple of other points that the Eagle folks would like you to focus on as well as you're looking at this. Are there things that are said in the report that you believe just aren't accurate or that need some kind of augmentation, that need to be explained better than they are? And again, keeping this messaging discussion that we just had in mind, are there things that could better explain to more people what is meant by certain things? And then in the summary of the work group recommendations, trying, as we talked about in previous meetings here, trying to identify the ongoing activities related to each recommendation. A lot of that's focused on what the state entities are doing, but are there other things that are being done privately that might have been missed, that are ongoing? Because this whole theme that a lot of you have talked about is this isn't just the state. This is other. This is private sector, and this is others who are already doing things and focusing on what's already happening in other places other than the public sector is really important too. So where did we miss some of those things, and what should be in the report there? So just wanted to highlight that. I don't expect anybody to have those at the ready today, but as you're looking at that over the next day and a half or so as you're making written comments, kind of look through those lenses. That would help out the Eagle team a lot. Phil, go ahead.
Just a small comment. In the key recommendations, if I remember right, there's nothing in there from the Natural and Working Lands group. And I understand some of the reasons why that might be, but it just seems like, especially in the forest area, but you could extend it to ag and wetlands. There's some stuff there that if we don't start now, we don't get to 100% potentially. Unless some of that stuff is moved forward, and it takes time. And also, I don't know how, to your point about not, or I guess Quentin's point about not saying things that are going to shut people down. What's not to like about what comes out of that work group? And Dan, our DNR director, last session talked about all the potential, even with public lands and things that are already moving forward. I just think that might be worthy of taking some credit for, and also setting an example and getting started on that, even if it's not going to make up the biggest chunk of getting us to our emissions targets in the next 5 or 10 years. Because if we don't do it now, it'll be too late.
Thanks, Phil. Carrie.
I realize I've talked a lot on today's call. Something Phil said just reminded me of a teeny tiny note I wrote in the corner of my paper today, which was where the voice of the youth in this, and that was something I spent a lot of time paying attention to. The last couple of years. Also, as a mom, you guys have all met Master Liam. I do want to make sure this plan is something worthy of my kids. I'm sure a lot of you guys feel the same way, because it'll be an artifact at some point. So I want to do right by them. So I don't know if that can fit in there. The other thing I forgot to say earlier is huge thanks to the public servants that worked on this. I know you guys didn't get much sleep, so thank you.
Thanks, Carrie. Any last thoughts before? I think we're just about at time for the section, but and I know the director's got some next steps and kind of what happens after today that she wants to go through, but I just want to make sure anybody did have something that they needed to say beforehand. Okay, thanks very much. Great discussion today. Director?
Great, thanks, Doug. And in the list of thank yous, I'm going to say thank you to GPI again. We've really appreciated their support over the last year and more, organizing through the work group, supporting our steering committee discussions, and certainly Doug and Trevor's work leading council meetings. So appreciate them.
Thank you.
All right, so I want to talk a bit about next steps. I talked some about this earlier, but I just wanted to articulate it again. So we're interested in feedback from council members, preferably by the end of the day tomorrow. We understand that that's a quick response time, and happy to try to facilitate you all, if it's need a little bit more time here or there or whatever it might be, or if it's getting on the phone and talking it through. So just trying to get our pieces together too. So again, this is a draft that then, will go to the governor and get posted on Friday. So there's going to be additional opportunities for back and forth with council members once we get past the Friday phase 2, but also, certainly are interested in input in the shorter term. It will be posted for public comment on Friday. You're all familiar with michigan.gov/climate. And then we'll be open for public comment for 30 days. So we're looking forward to getting that additional feedback. The posting is going to include instructions for submitting public comments on the draft plan so that those comments can come in through mail, email, or listening sessions. On Friday, we'll share the drafts for listening, or the dates for listening sessions in those 30 days. And as I mentioned earlier, if anyone's interested through your groups, your networks, et cetera, in having listening sessions, please, we'd be glad to either coordinate with you on that or get the feedback somehow. So I would think that the more conversation, the better would be great. Let's see, what did I miss? We also we've had one tribal consultation already. We're going to work with the tribes to schedule another tribal consultation early in February. We think it's important to receive their feedback and input as well. Our next council meeting is Tuesday, February 22nd from 1 to 3. So that should give us time to receive that input and then be able to, do some level of coordination and communication with all of you about what that looks like. So we'll be able to talk again then. And I see Phil's hands up. Phil, what's up?
Yeah, just to whom should we send comments, and are there any parameters around those? Anything and everything, or specific areas that would be most helpful to do the monumental task of turning this into something you're going to send out on Friday?
So the questions that you received from Doug through the course of this conversation, I just put the link in the chat for where the comments should go. So eagle-climatesolutions@michigan.gov. And then the questions that we use to orient ourselves today, I think would be the right questions that we're interested in. So I'll go ahead and put those in the chat again as well.
Okay, thanks.
Oh, it came up in blue. Pac, I don't know if there's an up-to-date comparison of state carbon reduction commitments. I don't know if that's something, Doug, maybe somebody at GPI would have, if you guys have done that sort of look across like the Midwest or across the nation.
Yeah, it exists out there. If it, and other people have done that. The question is how up to date it is, but because things are changing all the time. But if that's something that would be helpful, I think we could find something that we could pass along to the group.
I think that'd be extremely helpful.
Okay.
And that's it. That's all we've got for today. Really appreciate the dialogue. I think that conversation really helps us hone what's in the draft plan. Certainly interested as you continue to read through, digest, think about what you heard from your colleagues here today, and other things you might hear from your colleagues in your professional capacity or in others. This is. Somebody said it during the course of the discussion today, this is not a small problem. It's not a small plan, and it's not something that's going to be easy, but it is something where I think, as I hope I've been saying all along, there's a little bit of the answer in all of us. And there are a lot of really important foundations that have already been built in the state. So now ours is the task to step up to it and add to that and get us where we need to go. So really appreciative for the time that everyone's put into this, particularly, council members, work group chairs, and then the state of Michigan team along with the GPI team. So it's certainly been a lot of work. When I reflect back on the last 12 months, it's pretty incredible what we've pulled together. So grateful for your time and energy, and look forward to feedback on this draft plan and then what this takes us into as the next phase. So thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
I've gone a little early, 12 minutes back. Woohoo.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you. Talk soon.